Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Our next speaker is Mattei. His talk is titled Anatomy of a Lie, the $1.4 billion defamation case against Alex Jones. Although around the IRP, we've been calling it defamation cases we love. So Chris is going to be joining us by Zoom, and let me tell you a little bit about him. Chris is an attorney with Koskoff, and Beider, and he's dedicated his law practice to protecting individuals and the public from corporate and institutional abuse. Previously, he served as an assistant U.S. attorney in the U.S. Department of Justice. In the past decade, Chris has handled some of the country's highest profile cases. He's currently representing the Sandy Hook families against right-wing internet personality Alex Jones, whose claim that the Sandy Hook shooting didn't happen and that the surviving family members were actors. The case brought international attention to the abuse the family suffered and the corrosive threat of social media-fueled disinformation. The trial resulted in a $1.4 billion verdict against Jones and InfoWars, which is the largest defamation verdict in American history. Chris, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Just give me a nod, actually, if everybody can hear me and see me. You got me? Okay. Well, first of all, it's really wonderful to be here. I'm so grateful to be here virtually. I want to say that I was desperate to come out to the Bay Area to join you in person. I spent a couple years after college in the East Bay organizing healthcare workers for SEIU, so I really wanted to come back. I just finished a trial earlier this week, and life conspired against me to prevent me from joining you in person, but I'm so grateful to be participating. So I thought what I would do is start by laying out, and very briefly, how this case came to us and kind of how we ended up with the verdict that we did, and the significance that I see in this verdict and also the recent settlement between Dominion and Fox News and the upcoming trial involving Smartmatic and Fox News. So we represented the Sandy Hook families in connection with a lawsuit initially against Remington, the firearms manufacturer. And as that litigation went on, the family started talking to us about something we knew nothing about and had never heard of, which was that they were and had been, really since the time of the shooting, been experiencing harassing and threatening behavior on a near daily basis, behavior that had started online, that had migrated offline, and that was some of the most horrific and disgusting stuff that you can imagine. And they had, many of them, identified Alex Jones as the person they thought was the real progenitor of this lie, that they were actors, that they hadn't lost their children or their loved ones at Sandy Hook, and that they were part of a plot instigated by the government to strip Americans of gun rights. And so we started looking at it, and we dug up as much old video as we could find. I didn't really know who Alex Jones was. I kind of thought of him as a clownish character. I had no idea what his reach was, and that's something that we learned, and I want to talk with you a little bit about. We ended up bringing the case in 2018 against Alex Jones on behalf of 8 families who lost loved ones and a first responder to the school that morning, and went to trial last year on a defamation case against Alex Jones and also an intentional infliction of emotional distress claim against Alex Jones and InfoWars. And the heart of the case was really what by that time had become a 10-year campaign led by Alex Jones against these families. And that campaign, we proved, had resulted in catastrophic damages to the families. And I want to take you back for a moment to the day of the shooting and emphasize that within hours of the shooting, Alex Jones was on his show claiming that the shooting was likely staged. The next night, Robbie Parker, the father of Emily Parker, who was murdered at Sandy Hook, gave a statement outside his church. He was expecting to see one reporter from his home state of Utah and instead walked out to a throng of media And as he approached the microphone, his father, who was there, tried to diffuse the tension by making a lighthearted comment that made Robbie chuckle. InfoWars, we proved, was watching that broadcast and immediately seized on Robbie's momentary chuckle as evidence that he was an actor, faking his grief and faking that he had lost a child. InfoWars, from that day through the end of January, repeatedly showed that clip and called Robbie and the others actors. And this was really the first time that we were aware of, and I think the first time that it ever occurred, that conspiracy theorists who often gathered around mass shootings had accused victims themselves of being involved. So Alex Jones had a history of calling 9/11, kind of instigated by the government. He had, as recently as August of 2011, called Aurora a government operation, a shooting at the Aurora movie theater, but had never accused the families and victims themselves of being actors. And the result of that was an audience of his that had been radicalized over years to believe that the government was capable of horrific things, all as pretext to seize guns, that audience was then unleashed on the families. And so the evidence that we presented at trial was really that Alex Jones had instigated this lie, and that the families, some of whom were living on the run, some of whom were sleeping with weapons by their bedside out of fear of being attacked in their own homes. Alex Jones followers who had showed up to charity events to harass families, had defaced the graves of children who were murdered there. All of this we were able to trace back to Alex Jones, and that's, I think, how the jury in Connecticut came to the verdict that they did. So that's the outlines of the case. In kind of preparing for what I thought would be most useful for all of you, I wanted to talk a little bit about how surprised I was that both the growth of Alex Jones as a very, very influential person on the far right, and also the experience of these families went largely under the radar. So let's talk about Alex Jones for a second. Alex Jones, and I want to share, maybe this would be a good time for me to share a slide with you. This is coming through. This is one of the slides from my closing argument, and you'll see here that between 2014 and 2016, on these social media platforms alone, Alex Jones and InfoWars had 9.2 billion impressions. This was somebody who, by 2016, and this was an audience he amassed before the 2016 presidential election. This was somebody who was growing in influence and reach, I think largely outside of mainstream media reporting. And Alex Jones isn't alone in being among those who were kind of both fomenting and capitalizing on an increasingly alienated segment of American society. But he was certainly, I would say, the largest so-called media person, although I think he's in media. I don't think of him as a journalist at all, but kind of somebody who has performative journalism, that he was able to amass an audience of this size during this time without a whole lot of public scrutiny around him, I think was one of the major takeaways for me in kind of looking back historically at Alex Jones's development. Really, really underestimated in terms of his overall influence and reach. And for us, this 9.2 billion number was very, very helpful for a couple of reasons. Number one, it only takes a very, very small fraction of that audience to be radicalized to action, for those actions to be felt downstream by our clients. Even if you have 100,000 people out of that 9.2 billion who have come to believe as a result of Alex Jones's conduct that these families are actors, that can result in really catastrophic harm to them. So I wanted to highlight this fact for you so that you all can think about and I was kind of asked to consider, lessons that I took from this case that could also be shared with you, asked to consider how what really is I consider Alex Jones to be a political leader in a sense, a kind of bullhorn of this far-right movement, how this audience could have become so large and so radicalized, in some ways outside of public view, very online. The other thing I wanted to say about, what was surprising to me about the lack of understanding is, the families themselves, some of them became fairly public in their advocacy following the shooting. Some of them became very public in their charitable works following the shooting. But what was unknown was for the fact that for 10 years, so many of them were suffering, and really suffering in silence. And the number of people who have come up to me after this case and have said, God, I had no idea. I had no idea that they were going through this. Obviously, the worst thing that could ever befall somebody is losing a child, but the fact that they were dealing with harassment, threats, fear, having to protect their surviving children from this over the course of years was something that people were totally unaware of. And I'll confess, I wasn't aware of it too until they shared it with us. And this is, again, I think, something that is worth considering, how that story went untold. And I would often talk to the families that we represent about this, and some of them, because they've become public in certain ways, have relationships with journalists and reporters. But this part of the story, this fact that they were really kind of re-victimized over and over again, really wasn't told until our trial. And so I wanted to just share that observation with you, as you're thinking about your own work. And then the last thing I wanted to discuss in this lightning, you guys call this a lightning talk, right? This is a lightning talk. It's hard to boil down, like 4 years of litigation, really like 4 years of my life into 15 minutes. But I did want to talk about where we are in, defamation, First Amendment litigation. So all of you know that, our society is kind of at a very, very, I think, dangerous time where the threat of misinformation and disinformation is more serious, I think, than we've ever seen it, largely because of the speed at which it can spread over social media. By the way, I should just give me a nod if I'm going over here, because I can see you, but I can't see anybody else. Am I good? 2 minutes? Okay. The courts are, one place where this fight is being joined. I consider our case to be a landmark case at a point in time when, I think our society is trying to come up with ways to combat the threat of disinformation, which is very, very tough for us to get our hands around. Our hope is that this verdict will serve as a deterrent and will change some incentives, particularly within the far-right media ecosystem, which is largely online. I do expect that you're going to see more cases like this brought against, outfits that are even less well-known than InfoWars. You have podcasters that are gaining influence, that kind of traffic in disinformation. And so I think you're going to continue to see defamation as a tool to combat that. The very, very large cases against Fox News are also, I think, very significant in this way. But my own view is that unless we find ways to kind of manage and regulate social media and the ways in which I think the social media platforms bear quite a bit of responsibility for, it's fueling the 9.2 billion impressions that Alex Jones had over this time. We're going to really be just putting our kind of fingers in the wall, so to speak, without finding a way to make sure that social media platforms have their own incentives for combating the type of spread that we saw in this case. So that's what I have for you in my 15 minutes. I tried to kind of make a few points that I thought would be like, kind of helpful for this particular audience, and I am so grateful to have had the opportunity. I don't know if there are any time for questions or if you're going to be moving on to your keynote. I don't hear you, but I think you said unfortunately, so I'm going to take that to
I did. I said
unfortunately. And so what I would just
unfortunately,
say,
we do not, but thank you so much.
thank you, and I so appreciate the creative space with a very, very creative keynote speaker that you have coming up. Thank you very much.